Hello, everyone, and thank you all so much for being here tonight. It is so exciting to put on this program. I'm very excited to get to the music, but I know that we have important stuff that we have to go through first. So, um, with that, I just want to take my opportunity to welcome you to the Jewish Music Masterclass series produced by the Lowell Milken Center for Music of American Jewish Experience at the UCLA Herb Alpert School of Music. We are thrilled to have you join us for music and conversation with tonight's guest, the Pulitzer Prize winning composer Shulamit Ran. To make sure that you know about all of our programming related to music of the American Jewish experience, please make sure you're on our event email list. You'll find the link to the mailing list in the chat below, or simply Google UCLA Jewish Music. That's the way I still find it. And you'll find a link to our webpage. The next program in our Jewish Music Masterclass series is 2 weeks from today, January 19th, at an unusual time, 9 a.m. with a rebroadcasting at 5 p.m. to accommodate our incredible artist Gerard Edery coming to us from Warsaw. Gerard Edery is one of the world's foremost experts in the wide-ranging music of Sephardic diaspora, and we hope we will see you then. And now on to tonight's program. Shulamit Ran began composing songs to Hebrew poetry at the age of 7 in her native Israel. And by 9, she was studying composition and piano with some of Israel's most noted musicians. And within several years was having her early works performed by professional musicians as well as orchestras. She continued her studies in the U.S. on scholarship at the Mannes School, as well as and the American Israel Cultural Foundation, and has been awarded most major honors given to composers in the U.S., including the 91 Pulitzer Prize for her symphony. Her music has been performed worldwide by leading ensembles including the Chicago Symphony, the Philadelphia Orchestra, the Cleveland Orchestra, the Israel Philharmonic, the New York Philharmonic, the American Composers Orchestra. The list goes on and the list of names that she has collaborated with are equally distinguished, including Daniel Barenbaum, Pierre Boulez, Gustavo Dudamel, Zubin Mehta, just to name a few. She was composer in residence with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra between 1990 and 97, and with the Lyric Opera of Chicago in 1994 to 97, where her residency culminated in the premiere of her first opera, Between Two Worlds, The Dybbuk. The recipient of 5 honorary degrees, she is an elected member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Shulamit, who is the Andrew MacLeish Distinguished Service Professor Emerita in the University of Chicago Department of Music, where she has taught since 1973, is our guest tonight. And with that, I'd like to introduce Shulamit Ran. Hello, Shulamit. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Hello, Laurie. It's a pleasure, truly.
Thank you so much. So we've listed just a few of the many, many, many things that you have done and the incredible contributions to Jewish music that you've made. And I'm excited today we have several compositions that really represent several benchmarks at various times in your career and show interesting connections to who you are, both Jewishly and as a composer. And as I told you earlier today, and I'll say it again, that it has been so wonderful to get to know you, not only by talking to you, but through your music. You so much speaks through your music. So I hope everyone will get a little bit of that today. So let's go ahead and introduce the first work that we'll be talking about today. Would you like to tell us a little bit about Oh, the Chimneys before we listen to it?
Yes, of course. And of course, we will only listen as we will in the case of the other pieces that we have on our list, to segments out of the full works. All the Chimneys is a fairly substantial size-wise composition of about 20 minutes. And it is based on 5 poems by Nelly Sachs. Now, Nelly Sachs was the 1966 Nobel Prize winner, co-winner, actually, together with Shai Agnon, the great Israeli writer. Nelly Sachs was a poet, and even though she was born in Germany, but even though she fled to Sweden during the Holocaust together with her mother, she witnessed it from a certain geographical distance, but nonetheless, really the bulk of her work was dedicated to the Holocaust. And it is harrowing, powerful, beautiful poetry. And in fact, my acquaintance with it began, this is of course many years ago. It was not really that long, maybe a couple of years after she won the Nobel Prize. At that time, I lived in New York. I was a student at the Manners College of Music, as you mentioned. And I walked on Fifth Avenue, and there was a big Crocs and Brentano bookstore, that great mythological bookstore chain. And I walked into the store, and I remember it as though it was yesterday. There was this big pack of volumes of this book that had just come out in print then. And I looked at it and I saw it. It said Nelly Sachs or the Chimneys, selected poems. And I opened the book. And quite coincidentally, the poem that my eyes fell upon, and this is a bilingual edition. So you have the German original on the one side and the English on the other side, on the flip side of the page.
Pardon me for interrupting you, but that you just reminded me. If, as we are discussing the various texts and works that we're talking about today, there is a link to for anyone to view the full text and program notes that will be dropped into the chat. It's just a Google folder, so please enjoy and follow along with us.
And
forgive the interruption.
Case, sure. And in this case, I will read that portion of the poetry of what we'll be listening to. And that's because I want to convey to you my first impression. So I picked up the book, opened the book on a poem that in English is called A Dead Child Speaks. And I started to read. Now, with a lot of poetry, at least my experience, is that I start reading a poem and I read the first couple of lines, and then I stop and I reflect upon it, and I read it again and I think about it, and then I go on, and then maybe later I read the whole thing all at once. Here, once I began reading, there was no way to stop. I was reading this. My mother held me by my hand. Then someone raised the knife of parting. So that it should not strike me, my mother loosed her hand from mine. But she lightly touched my thighs once more, and her hand was bleeding. After that, the knife of parting cut in two each bite I swallowed. It rose before me with the sun at dawn and began to sharpen itself in my eyes. Wind and water ground in my ear, and every voice of comfort pierced my heart. As I was led to death, I still felt in the last moment the unsheathing of the great knife of parting. So, reading this poem from start to finish, it was the kind of poem where I had to get to the end. There was no stopping. I knew where it was going, but I had to get there. It was such a powerful experience that I knew immediately that I would want to do something musically with this poem. And on the next page, right on the next page, there was a second poem that began with, I will just read the first few lines. The name of the poem is Already Embraced by the Arm of Heavenly Solace. And this is the mother's side. Already embraced by the arm of heavenly solace, the insane mother stands with the tatters of her torn mind, with the charred tinders of her burned mind. This is powerful stuff. All these years later, I still get very emotional reading it. In any case, of course, I bought the book and started thinking about it. I did not approach this immediately, but over time, I started, first of all, the first task was to put the poetry together. And when you have poetry that begins, let's say you're thinking of a series of poems, a song cycle. If you have something that begins with this kind of poetry, you cannot then move to something else. This is a subject that you know you're going to stay with. And I ultimately selected 5 poems, and I arranged them in a certain way that allowed me to treat them musically, since it is always my first and most important concern is what kind of a work of music is this going to be? And if someone came to it not knowing anything about the subject matter, not understanding the words, what would that person get from the music itself? How am I putting it all together? And so, first of all, there was a question of what instrumentation I was going to use. And my goal really was to use the smallest number of instruments that would give me the largest sense of a large canvas, is the way that I think about it. And I ended up choosing flute, interchangeable with piccolo, clarinet, interchangeable with bass clarinet, cello, piano, percussion, and singer, of course. I then arranged the poems in such a way that the 2 middle poems, as I was thinking about them, because the first and second poem are for me really one unit, in a sense like a prologue, and then comes the second poem. And then the last poem, which is truly harrowing, Hell is Naked. That is sort of the second pillar, the weighty pillars. In between the third and the fourth poems allowed me to create a certain kind of contrast in the music, though they still, of course, they all talk about the subject matter. In any case, it's a large-scale work, and what I would like us to listen to is that first movement, where my attempt in this prologue was to have the listener get into my mind on that initial experience with the poem. And then we'll only hear about 20 seconds from the second poem, which is where actual singing begins, because the first poem is all reading, all speaking.
Shoot, sorry. Having slight issue here.
Yeah, this is the beginning of the second song.
Yes, here we go.
Listen to the first.
Abschiedsmesse. Die Mutter löste ihre Hand aus der meinen, damit es mich nicht treffe. Sie aber berührte noch einmal leise meine Hüfte und da blutete ihre Hand. Von da ab schnitt mir das Abschiedsmesser den Bissen in der Kelle in zwei. Es fuhr in der Morgendämmerung mit der Sonne hervor und begann sich in meinen Augen zu schärfen. In meinem Ohr schliffen sich Winde und Wasser und jede krosse Stimme stach in mein Herz. Als man mich zum Tode führte, fühlte ich im letzten Augenblick noch das Herausziehen des großen Abschiedsmessers. Von Andesherrschen lasst es umfangen. Steht die wahnsinnige Mutter mit den Fetzen ihres zerrissenen Verstandes.
I should mention, by the way, that the wonderful singer here is Lucy Shelton, who is one of the great sopranos singing a lot of music, but a lot of contemporary music.
And it's an astonishing recording. As you described it, I mean, I could certainly discern how you created a really interesting palette of colors. A really exploring the range of each instrument and exploring what different colors and timbres you could get from each member of the ensemble. First, I wanted to mention this. I think this is kind of exciting. In preparing for this, we realized that the 50th anniversary of the premiere of this work is in, I think, 2 weeks. So this was a really exciting early work of yours, and I'm curious that this work is very rich with meaning. Oh, the chimneys. I mean, it's evocative in many ways, and I'm curious, how has the meaning of the piece as you wrote it in 1969 changed, and how does it speak differently to us, if it does?
Well, of course, it's impossible for me to say how it speaks differently, how it speaks to us in the plural. For me, when I wrote it, my thought was that this is my way of saying never again. I don't think that I realized at the time when I wrote it that maybe 1 or 2 decades afterwards, something that is called Holocaust denying would suddenly rise its head. Who would ever doubt that the Holocaust occurred? And yet, it happened. Not right then, but later. And today, much to my astonishment, there still is, in fact, there is, without a doubt, a resurgence of anti-Semitism in various places. Mm-hmm. There is some here, there is some in Europe. Surprisingly for me, there is some in Germany. I say surprisingly because in a way, I credit the Germans for coming to terms that's the wrong word, coming to terms, but facing up to what had happened. Mm-hmm. And in Berlin, of course, but also in other cities in Germany, you have various ways in which the events are memorialized in a way that is extremely respectful and certainly part of the education also for young people has been to teach them about the Holocaust. And yet, you're hearing voices from Germany too, of resurgence of Nazism, and it is very startling to me to see what is happening. To go back to my composition, I remember after one of the earlier situations where the work was already performed and recorded. It was not the particular recording that we were listening to, but I remember in a class, and it was not in the United States, but I played a recording of the work and talked about it. And afterwards, an elderly gentleman came over to me. He revealed his arm, and of course, it had a number. And he looked into my eyes and he said, "How did you know?" And that to me was the greatest statement of, okay, I understood. I said something that spoke to the experience. And of course, there are times that people talk about, okay, what are artists, in what way are artists special and people and so on, this and that. And to me, we are regular people with the one thing that maybe we can put ourselves in a situation that we have not ourselves experienced. And make it ours and be able to bring it to those who are listening or reading or whatever the case, the art form might be. So Wonderful. It's a work that, was very important for me at the time. And today, all these years later, it's still a part of something that I want to continue to say.
And I encourage everyone to go out and listen to all 5 movements of Oh, the Chimneys. It's a very powerful work. And with that, recognizing our limited time, getting to go through a lifetime's worth of music, the next work will be listening to a movement of your third string quartet, Glitter, Doom, Shards, and Memory. What should we be listening to when we get to listen to watch an incredible performance of this particular movement?
Yes, this is one performance here that we can actually see, not only hear. So, Pacifica Quartet, which is really one of the great string quartets of our time. And I've had a relationship with them that spanned many years as part of, while I was professor at the University of Chicago and also artistic director of Contempo, the contemporary chamber players of the University of Chicago. And Pacifica, they were for quite a few years, they were artists in residence with us. And so we had a lot of doings together, they and I. And they had asked me early on if I could compose a string quartet for them, but it was not the right time. But much later on, it must have been about 2012, that they came to me and they said, well, how about now? Would you write a string quartet for me, for us? And I said, well, okay. And then they said, and we have a special request. We would very much like the piece that you write to be in some way associated with the visual arts. And one reason why they expressed that interest was because at that particular point in time, there were also artists in residence with the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And I said to them, well, let's see, is there a particular period that you're especially interested in? And they said, well, you know, if you could do something.
Some days it feels like the only thing we can agree on is that we can't agree.
That would be between the two world wars. And that immediately somehow set my mind again on the experience of my people. And I started to look into this and to study and to talk to people. And it was somehow, sometimes serendipity happens. And I was at the American Academy in Rome during the fall of, 2011 or 12. Doesn't matter. In any case, I was talking to one of the people who was a fellow at that time, who is an art preservationist, Albert Albano, and an extraordinarily knowledgeable person. And we talked about this, and I told him about my quest. And somehow our conversations led to a Jewish painter whose work I was not familiar with, Felix Nussbaum. And of course, we're also fortunate that we have Google. So the simplest thing is you Google a name and a world springs to your consciousness. And there I immediately saw some really beautiful, powerful paintings. And I read his life story, born in 1904 and perished in Auschwitz in 1944, just short of his 40th birthday. I decided to write a work that would explore, in a sense, really not so much his paintings, though his paintings, the quality definitely was with me throughout. And for example, there's a very, very beautiful he calls it a self-portrait with a Jewish identification card. I don't know if you can see it. Can you see it? So this actually, I'm showing you, this is from the inside booklet of the recording that has recently come out of the Pacifica Quartet, where this quartet is included. Of course, his painting was with me. But more than anything else, I tried to somehow imagine, because he spent the last 10 years of his short life escaping, hiding, living in fear until finally he ended up in Auschwitz. So I tried to think, somehow put my mind into what it would be like to have a life that is then disrupted so violently, so brutally. So this quartet has 4 movements, and again, we can only listen to the first movement. In this particular movement, which I called Das, was geschah, is the German word, and this is the words by Paul Celan. This is how he described the Holocaust in later years. That is the name that he gave the Holocaust. But in any case, I try to somehow create a world where there is life. There's the simple beauty of ordinary life. We don't really appreciate the beauty of the small things, of the details. God is in the details. So is the devil. So that rupture between a life with its sweet normalcy and facing something altogether different. So we can hear here that first movement performed by Pacifica on a video.
An astonishing work and just brilliantly executed in that recording. Unfortunately, we have to keep moving. I did want to make sure that I mentioned to everyone, though, as questions may come up, feel free to use the chat. We will be having a question and answer session at the end. But if you have a question that you need to put out there, feel free to put it in the chat, and we'll make sure that we get to it during the question and answer session. So now we're moving on to something completely different in your body of repertoire. Next we'll be hearing the first movement of a set of 4 songs, Shirim Liyom Tov. We're going to be hearing the movement Shiru Ladunai. So maybe you could tell us just a little bit about the set, because there's just such a beautiful story around, and then you could tell us a little bit about this particular setting.
Well, completely different is entirely accurate. Yes. Yeah. Well, so this takes me back to 2 of the most truly joyous events of my life, the bar mitzvot of my 2 sons. And the first one of them, I knew that I would be so emotional. And there comes that moment, I mean, obviously we're not talking about an Orthodox bar mitzvah, but there comes a moment where their parents are called to the bima, to the stage, so to speak, and to say something to the young man or young woman. Again, since I'm not, we're not in the setting of an Orthodox situation. In any case, I said to my husband about, I don't know, it must have been 8 months before the first bar mitzvah, and I was walking with my son, the older one, at the time also. Between the times that we would meet with our rabbi, I would walk with him on just rehearsing his parasha and his haftarah. Those are the sections that a bar mitzvah boy would be learning from his portion of the Torah and the portion from the prophets that is associated with it. So at a certain point, I said to my husband, I just know it. I will be so emotional that when the time comes to go to say something at the bima, I will burst out in tears. And he said to me, well, then you know what? Instead of that, then write a piece for Koleinu. Now, Koleinu continues to be the very, very amateur, but very enthusiastic choir, small choir of our congregation, led by a math professor, Harvey Blau, math professor at Northern Illinois University. And he said, well, write a piece for them instead. I said, that's, well, it was actually a scary proposition for me. But of course, that was the kind of thing where he threw this at me, and I had to, of course, take it. So I very, very fortunately, the particular portion that my son had both for his Torah portion and for the Haftarah, and the same then was true 21 months later for the younger son, that they had some really special portions that they were studying. So extracting a certain text out of them was inevitably joyous and fun. So we're going to hear, I guess, at this point, the first of those, right? Yeah. So Shir L'Adonai, that's right, and yeah. So, you know, this recording is by a more professional choir, the Chicago a cappella. But I have to tell you all that it was such a joy for me when a few weeks after I delivered my music to the choir, and most people of that choir actually do not read music, they learn by rote and all that. I went to the supermarket one day, and over the produce, as we were choosing stuff, there came one of the ladies in the choir, and she started talking to me about how much the choir was enjoying learning my song. And it was just a great experience to know that I could write not just for a group such as the Pacifica Quartet, and not just for a purpose of a concert experience, but rather for an event in my son's life, and have people that I know, members of the community, learn it and have some fun with it. So that felt really good.
Oh, and the music just exudes joy. I mean, it's just, it's both Renaissance and contemporary, and just it just makes me want to, like, I don't know, as a choral singer, that makes me want to sing. So,
and you know what? The best part of it yet was my husband and I decided that I would keep it a secret from my son, and then from the second one, until relatively close to the bar mitzvah. We were not going to just pull the surprise upon him right then and there, because, you know, kids of that age is like, oh, my mother is so embarrassing. And what is she doing? And, you know, they have their friends there from school and all of that. So we were going to tell him. But there was this one day that I was at home and the songs were done, and I sat at the piano and I played them, and he walked through the door and said, "Ima, He says, Mother, what is it? It's so beautiful. So no compliment in the world
Wow.
was better. And then when the time came for the younger one, when things got close, or actually he said to me, so are you going to write two songs for me too? And I said to him, of course the songs were done already, would you like me to? And he said, well, isn't that expected? So yes, it was expected. So yeah.
Wow. Well, there's so much joy in that. Not to say that there isn't joy in this next work, but this next work really explores a different side of what it is to be Jewish, which is really the idea of challenging of faith. Which I mean, the way this next work approaches it is very exciting. So your credo, or your credo ani ma'amin, it's always fascinating to me when somebody with, that comes from the Jewish world engages with, an element from outside the Jewish world, in this case, the Mass. So tell us how that came together, and then we have some beautiful moments to listen to.
Yeah, and I should certainly explain that the majority of my music is not about something. I have a lot of solo music and chamber music, and I have orchestra music, and for the most part, it does not explore Jewish themes. However, especially when it comes to writing with text, I'm pulled in that direction, and works that we will not explore today include some music where I use poetry in Hebrew by contemporary Israeli poets, by medieval poetry, and so on. I'm definitely pulled in that direction. But in any case, this work came about when I was contacted one day by Joe Jennings, who was for many, many years the director of the greatly renowned Chanticleer, the great all-men, 12-men SATB, soprano, alto, tenor, bass choir. And Mr. Jennings contacted me and said to me, we would like to have you consider writing a work for us. And of course, my heart just jumped, because that is such a great choir, and I so adore them, and that immediately was something that I wanted to do. And he said, we are planning a mass where each section would be composed by a different composer. And the mass would have a name, and on peace to earth, or on something of this kind, and both peace and earth to it, a Chanticleer mass. And would you be interested in writing a movement? Well, a mass, okay. So then I said to him, well, so can I choose which section of the mass I'm going to be writing? And he said, we already chose which section you would write. You would write the credo. Well, so I said, I remember very sort of cautiously, I said to him, tell me what is the credo for you, from your perspective. And he said, well, of course, this is where the center of the mass, in a sense, and where the faith, usually the Catholic faith, is articulated. And I said to him, well, but you probably realize that I'm Jewish, I'm Israeli, and if I were to take on something like that, it would have to be from a different perspective. It would not be a Catholic Christian perspective, obviously. And he said to me, don't worry, we know that, and we assume that you would take it from another point of view. And that is our hope, in fact, that you would make of it what you want us to see in it. And so this was really a very, very great and wonderful challenge for me. And I have to say that just putting together the texts was in a way a creative act of its own. And it took me months to actually put together the text that I wanted, that for me cohered into a totality, and that would therefore allow me to do something that I thought musically would cohere into a totality. In the midst of it, I also flew to San Francisco in order to witness the group rehearsing, and also to explore, since I knew by then that there would be a couple of sections where I would want there to be a reading, a recitation. Now, the problem with that is that Chanticleer is an all acoustic choir. They do not do anything with microphones. And a singer is usually trained to sing, which doesn't necessarily mean that they can project vocally in speaking. It does not come, it's not something that can be assumed. Some do, but many do not. And so I wanted to know whether there would be any that would, because that would be important for my piece, since there would be no miking happening. And indeed, there were a couple who were just the right people. In any case, I wrote this big piece. And the choice of poetry, well, there is first of all the beginning of the credo that speaks to the belief in one God. And I chose to set it in the original Latin. So there is, that part is in Latin. There is quite a bit in Hebrew, because what I selected was to take Maimonides, the Rambam, Ani Ma'amin, I believe, and use parts of it as a setting. There is English, a good bit of it, as you will hear even just in the section that we're listening to. So there are these three languages there, and for me it was about, especially the second half of the work, which I don't know whether we'll be able to hear any of it, was not just to set a text that deals with the belief in one God and the maker of everything, and so on, which is explored in the three languages that are being used here. But also to ask the question, what does faith mean in the face of the worst kind of trial of, as in the Holocaust? And so there are a number of readings here and singing of what I call testaments and reflections. The very last portion, which definitely will not hear. And I should also explain that I, as a composer, got so carried away with writing this work that I completely forgot that I was commissioned to write a work of maximum 8 minutes. And I ended up writing a work of 18 minutes. Consequently, Chanticleer got back to me and said, well, you know what? You wrote a work of 18 minutes, but we have no time on the CD and on the concert program that we're planning, which is without break and has all these other movements. And in between, we're also putting some Renaissance music by Gesualdo and by Gabrieli. There's simply no room for a work of 18 minutes. And I sort of said to them, I have no idea how I'm going to cut it up. How long would it have to be cut up for? And they said, well, about 12 minutes. And then they said, but you know what? We already did it for you. So they came with a kind of a plan that the 12 of them together, plus their music director, Joe Jennings, they worked it out to see whether that would be agreeable to me. And I ended up making only very small tweaks in order to connect certain things and alter just a few minor things for this abridged version. And it is that abridged version that was recorded by Chanticleer and is still available. You can hear it on YouTube, and we'll listen to a portion of it now. But in the full version, that's not included in the abridged version, there's also a segment right after 9/11. I remember reading, and it so grabbed me, as I think it did so many people, about this young man, a Jewish man, who stayed in order to remain, first to try to save him, but when that was no longer possible, he stayed with this man who was a quadriplegic, and he was there walking in the tower. They were walking together in the same place, and that man, he sent his nurse away to safety, and he remained. So the description of that event from the New York Times was something that I found so unbelievable that I wanted to use that as well. And so there's a collection of texts that have to do with faith in the most adverse of circumstances. And all of this is, of course, wrapped together. There are also certain things that are central to the sort of larger sense of Jewish liturgy, the Shema Israel. There is the El Malei Rachamim, God of mercy. So it's a vast, all-encompassing text.
More than 6 decades after Rachel Herzl was parted from her parents, on a fine spring day in Auschwitz, as a girl of 15, never to see them again, she vividly remembers the selection process, how first her father was separated from her, and then her mother. She recalls his final parting words, spoken to her in Yiddish. Do not forget one thing. God is the Father of everyone.
So we are running a little bit behind, and as I'm looking at the clock, I'm wondering if maybe now would be a good time for us to go to questions, and then end with one last tune to not tune, but one last piece to
you can call it tunes.
Have somebody play us off. But we'd love to open it up to questions now. So if there's any questions from anyone in the room, there's few enough here that feel free to just unmute yourself and ask.
Uh-oh.
Silence. Well, in that case, we can. If there aren't questions from the room, we can just. Dr. Kligman, would you like to? Actually, there are a few questions now popping up. Wonderful. Always just takes a second. I just need to be patient. Marjorie, why don't you go ahead and jump in with your first question? Would you like to go ahead and ask it yourself?
I think
Marjorie, no?
Marjorie needs to unmute herself.
Unmute can be found in the lower left corner of any screen. Okay, well, Dr. Kligman, you had a question, I thought. Oh no, you didn't. You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, sorry about that. Thank you for just a wonderful program, and it's so nice to hear your work and your perspectives. Can you tell us what you're working on now?
Yes, I can tell you. I'm writing an opera, Anne Frank.
Wow. When can we expect a premiere of that work?
Well, I think that probably, well, first of all, we have to be rid of this pandemic that has taken over our lives. But I think that probably the premiere will take place 1.5 years or so from now.
That's very exciting.
I mean, I believe it will be most likely in the 21-22 season.
Fantastic. Do you already is there a particular ensemble that is premiering it?
Yes, Indiana University.
Oh, fabulous.
Their School of Music has a huge and very, very strong opera program. Indeed. And they have premiered various important works at different times over their long lives. And I'm very, very excited about it. In fact, one of the things that is wonderful about the situation is that there are also readings readings in quotation marks, since they are, of course, prepared quite carefully, that only have the singers with piano, so piano vocal, for the piano vocal score. And we already had a reading of the first act, obviously before the situation erupted. And it was really a wonderful experience, because working with young people is very special, very, very exciting. And I'm looking forward to a reading of the second act when we're able to do it. And then right now I'm completing the orchestration of the opera. Normally, composing and orchestrating is not something that I do separately. But with an opera, it is absolutely obligatory to have a piano vocal score if singers are going to be able to learn it. For the most part, that's really the only way to do it. And so in this instance, I began with the piano vocal, of course, in certain situations, more like a short score, and then from there going to the long score. So that's what I'm doing now.
Can you hear me?
I can hear somebody.
Yes. Yes. I volunteer at the Museum of Tolerance in Los Angeles. We have a wonderful Anne Frank exhibit. And there was a group that put on a play about Anne Frank at the museum. So I don't know if you're ever in Los Angeles. That might be something to see.
I can only hope. Yeah, that's right. I've been to the Anne Frank house, of course, in Amsterdam. Yes. And, over my life, from a young age, the Yad Vashem in Israel, which is
we were there, yes.
Yes, but the early Yad Vashem, did you see the early one or the one that was built in the last few decades? Because
the later one.
The later one, yeah. Well, the later one, of course, is extraordinary. But the early one was very powerful too. Very, very powerful, very wonderful. Yeah. So, yeah.
I would be curious to know it is interesting how you return to the show as a theme, as a source of musical inspiration, but you do it from different perspectives and in different ways. And I'm curious, is there something in particular that keeps drawing you back, or is it just that there are so many stories to tell? I mean, as you do show, as I said, many different sides.
Well, actually between 1969, when I wrote All the Chimneys, I did not necessarily expect to go back to the subject matter. Years later, in 1998, I was commissioned by the Baltimore Symphony to write a work. We didn't get to it today, but this would have been the next on the list, Vessels of Courage and Hope, which in some sense, of course, also deals with the Shoah, because it deals with what came to be known as the Exodus story, the ship that in pre-state Israel, refugees from the Holocaust were trying to get to the shores of Israel, but because of the British blockade, they were unable to, and a battle ensued, and the ship was sent back to Europe. So that, of course, touches on the Shoah. But then really it was up until 2006 when I wrote the Credo Ani Ma'amin that I really came back to the topic, and then more recently with the string quartet. So, there are decades where I didn't come to it. So, it's calling me when there is something that seems somehow appropriate, such as when you're asking yourself about faith. Obviously, so many people after the Shoah ask themselves, can one still maintain faith? And there were those who said no, and there were those who said yes, and strong reasons and emotions on both sides. So, the string quartet, it's because Pacifica came to me with this particular angle. Most likely, a string quartet, I would have not been thinking about writing something that had a storyline in addition to the pure music line. I mean, again, it is essential for me that the music by itself, as I said much earlier, would function as music regardless of whatever issue it's touching on. But the string quartet, I have 2 other string quartets, and they are entirely abstract, so to speak, and 2 other works for string quartet that are shorter. So it is, I guess I'm listening with an ear where it seems to be something that I think that I can make a statement. I think what it is that I want to give voice to those whose voice has been taken. That continues to be essential and important. So to give voice to those who are gone.
With that, I think we probably at a wonderful place to wrap. If there are any other questions, please feel free to jump in. If not, then just on behalf of the Lowell Milken Center for Music of American Jewish Experience, I want to thank you, Shulamit, for spending your evening with us and really enriching us with just amazing music and just wonderful stories, and hearing how this music has come together and how you express just so much through your art. So thank you. Thank you to, in the background, one of my dear colleagues, Beth Kramer, who helps keep us running. Thank you to Dr. Mark Kligman. Thank you to all of our thank you to all of you. Thank you for all joining us today. And with that, please be sure to join us in 2 weeks for Gerard Edery, and go listen to some music. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.